She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She just stood there while a woman draped in designer silk looked her up and down like she was something that had wandered in off the street and said, loud enough for the entire room to hear, "I don't care how much my son loves you. Women like you don't belong in families like ours." And the room full of powerful people, people with old money and older bloodlines, laughed. Not nervously, not quietly. They laughed. Vanessa Carter had survived a lot of things in her 34 years, but nothing had ever made her feel so completely alone in a room full of people until that moment. What none of them knew, what she didn't even know, was that the one man who could end all of it in a single sentence was already standing in the hallway, listening to every word. If you've ever been in a room where you were the only one who looked like you, where every smile felt like a test you weren't told how to pass, stay with me, because this story is for you. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss a story like this one. Drop a like and tell me in the comments, what city or country are you watching from? I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Now let's get into it. The orchids arrived at 7 in the morning. 43 stems, all white, wrapped in tissue paper so thin it looked like it might dissolve in the February air. The delivery man handed them to Vanessa at the front door of the estate with a card tucked between the stems that simply read, "For the woman who made me remember what home feels like. T." She stood in the doorway in a robe holding those flowers for a long moment. Long enough that the delivery man shifted his weight awkwardly and said, "Ma'am, you okay?" "Yeah." She exhaled slowly. "Yeah, I'm good." She wasn't entirely sure that was true, but she brought the flowers inside, found a vase that probably cost more than her first apartment, and arranged them the way her grandmother had taught her. Not perfectly, but honestly, some stems a little taller than others, the way real things grow. It was her birthday. She was 34 years old, standing in a 10,000 square foot estate in the hills above Seoul, married to a man most of the city's elite feared by name and never dared approach directly. And the only birthday message she'd received before 9 a.m. was from her younger sister back in Atlanta, a string of emojis and a voice note of their mother singing off-key into her phone. Vanessa played the voice note twice. She wasn't going to call that loneliness. She refused to call it that. She had chosen this life. She had chosen Taijin, and she didn't need a crowded room of people who genuinely loved her to feel like her life was worth something. She'd learned that a long time ago, back when she was 18 and sitting in a financial aid office being told that her test scores were impressive, but the scholarship had gone to someone else, and she'd had to decide in that moment whether to crumble or recalibrate. She'd recalibrated then. She could recalibrate now. What she had not accounted for was the black car that pulled into the front courtyard at 10:45. She heard it before she saw it. The sound of gravel under expensive tires, then the soft mechanical click of a door. She moved to the window and felt the first cold thread of dread run through her chest when she recognized the silhouette stepping out of the vehicle. Madame Kang. Taejin's mother was 61 years old and had the posture of a woman who had spent 6 decades making other people feel like they were standing incorrectly. She was tall for her generation, wore her silver hair swept back in a way that cost a great deal of money to look effortless, and she moved through spaces like she had personally approved them before entering. Behind her, Taejin's sister, Min Jae, 37, sharp-jawed, and dressed in something pale and expensive, already checking her phone with the distracted energy of someone performing casualness. Behind Min Jae, 4 other women. 2 Vanessa recognized as cousins from a family dinner 8 months ago. 2 she had never seen before. Vanessa stepped back from the window. She hadn't been told anyone was coming. She pulled out her phone and texted Taejin, "Your mother is here. Did you know about this?" The 3 dots appeared, then disappeared, then appeared again. Then his message came through. "I'm still in the meeting. It must have been arranged separately. I'll be home by 7. I'm so sorry, Nessa. Just be yourself. You'll be fine." She stared at those last 3 words for a moment longer than she should have. "You'll be fine." She put the phone face down on the counter and went to answer the door. Madame Kong did not say happy birthday when Vanessa opened the door. She said, "The orchids are a strange choice for a foyer." Vanessa smiled the smile she had practiced. Warm, unhurried, not defensive. "Taejin sent them. I like them there." Madame Kang stepped past her without waiting to be invited in, which was technically her son's house, but which she had never seemed to register as belonging to anyone other than herself. The others followed, and Min-jae passed Vanessa with a glance that lasted roughly a quarter of a second and communicated a complete and considered judgment. The staff appeared within moments, quiet, efficient, clearly having received instructions Vanessa had not been copied on. Tea was prepared. A spread of small dishes materialized on the low table in the main sitting room. Everyone arranged themselves with the choreographed ease of people who had rehearsed this particular performance before. Vanessa sat at the edge of it. She was offered tea. She accepted. She asked polite questions about the drive and received polite answers, and understood within 7 minutes that this was not a birthday visit. This was something else. She didn't know yet what it was, but she could feel it in the way Minji kept glancing at her phone with a small, patient smile, like someone waiting for a timer to run out. "The house looks well maintained," Madame Kang said, in a tone that somehow made maintenance sound like the highest aspiration a space could achieve. "We have a good team," Vanessa said. "Taejin always had high standards for his properties." A pause. "This was designed by architect Lim, originally, before Taejin had some changes made." Another pause, this one carrying more weight. "For you." "I know," Vanessa said. "He told me." "Did he?" It wasn't a question. One of the cousins, the one Vanessa remembered as Su Yeon, early 40s, worked in finance, had shaken Vanessa's hand at that dinner 8 months ago, with the grip of someone who wanted her to know she wasn't impressed, shifted in her seat and said something to Min-jae in Korean. Minji's response was quiet and brief and made the other cousin cover a smile with her hand. Vanessa's Korean was functional, not perfect. She caught about 60% of rapid conversation depending on context and how much she was already paying attention to body language. What she caught in that exchange was enough to know the comment had been about her. What the smile told her was that it had not been kind. She drank her tea. She told herself, "You've been in harder rooms than this. You've sat across from people who didn't think you belonged, and you've outlasted every single one of them. This is just a room. These are just people. Stay." So she stayed. The shift happened around the 40-minute mark. It was subtle at first, the way all cruelty begins tentatively to test whether the target will defend themselves or simply absorb. Minji commented that she'd heard Vanessa had worked in marketing before the marriage, her voice carrying the specific inflection of someone using the word marketing, the way others might say accounting at a small firm. "Brand strategy mostly," Vanessa said. "I ran campaigns for 3 global health nonprofits and a tech company before I transitioned." "Transitioned," Minji repeated and smiled. "Yes, that's one word for it." Vanessa looked at her directly. "What word would you use?" Minji just smiled wider and looked away, which was somehow worse than anything she might have said. Madame Kang set down her teacup with a small, deliberate sound. "We worry about Taejin," she said. Not to the room. To Vanessa specifically. The way you speak to someone when you want them to understand the conversation is for their benefit, that you are the authority here and they are the recipient. He carries enormous responsibility. The business, the family's standing, the obligations that come with his position. It requires a certain kind of partnership. "I understand his responsibilities," Vanessa said carefully. "I'm sure you understand them. I wonder sometimes whether you understand what it means to carry them alongside him." Madame Kang's eyes were direct and clear and utterly without apology. What it means to be a Kang, what it requires socially, professionally. In terms of the networks one must navigate, the families one must interface with. These are relationships built over generations. They have expectations. "I've met most of those families," Vanessa said. "I've managed those events and those dinners and those relationships for the past 2 years. "You've attended them," Madame Kang corrected gently. "There is a difference." The room was quiet. The 2 cousins were watching with the barely concealed attention of people who had specifically come to watch something. Vanessa set her own cup down, steadily. "I'm not sure I understand the distinction you're making, Madame Kang. Would you like to be more specific?" And that small, precise question seemed to be the moment someone decided the gloves could come off. It was Soo-yeon who said it first, not Min-jae, who Vanessa had expected. Not Madame Kang, who had the most authority and therefore the most to lose by being explicit. It was Soyeon, who had nothing to risk and therefore nothing to restrain her, who put down her cup and said with the calm of someone stating a simple fact, "Let's be honest. We're not talking about social skills. We're talking about fit. About whether someone who came from where you came from can ever really understand what this family is, what it represents, and what it needs to protect." Vanessa looked at her. "Where I came from." "Your background," Suyeon said. "Your world. It's very different from ours." "Different how?" Again, not a question, a request to say the thing out loud. Suyeon glanced at Min-jae. Min-jae looked at her nails. "Different in every way that matters to the people in this city," Suyeon said. "I'm sure you're a lovely person, but lovely isn't enough when your husband's name is attached to decisions worth billions of won, when the families he needs to trust him are watching who he brings home, when he marries a black woman," Vanessa said quietly. "That's what you mean." Nobody denied it. The silence was so complete that Vanessa could hear the faint sound of the heating system somewhere in the walls of the house. She noticed, in the distant, almost academic way you notice things when your body has gone very still and very cold, that her hands were perfectly steady on her lap. She found that surprising. She'd expected them to shake. They didn't shake. "Nobody is saying that," Min-jae said finally, her voice carrying the particular boredom of someone who had decided the conversation needed to be managed back into territory. She controlled. "We're saying that Taejin made a choice that has consequences, and that those consequences fall on this entire family, not just on him." "And on me," Vanessa said. "On all of us," Min-jae agreed. "But mostly, yes, on the family name, which you now carry, whether or not any of us are comfortable with that." Vanessa looked at her for a long moment. She was trying to locate something in herself. The correct response, the right register, the balance between dignity and the very real urge to say something that would cut and not heal. She had that thing in her, the capacity for precision damage when pushed far enough, and she'd learned years ago to distrust it, to give it room to move without letting it drive. She breathed. "I married Taejin," she said. "I didn't marry an approval process." Min-jae laughed. It was a short, bright, unimpressed sound. "That's very romantic," she said. "But romance doesn't negotiate business alliances. Romance doesn't sit across from the Jong family at a board meeting and represent 50 years of carefully built credibility." "I've sat across from the Jong family," Vanessa said. "I sat across from them last October at the Hanum dinner and had a 90-minute conversation with Director Jong about infrastructure investment, and they walked away satisfied." "They were polite," Min-jae said. "They were interested," Vanessa said. "There's a difference. I believe you mentioned something about differences." Something crossed Min-jae's face. Not quite anger, more like the recalibration of someone who had expected less resistance and was now deciding how much force to apply. Madame Kang cleared her throat. And then she said the thing that Vanessa would hear in the quiet of 3 a.m., for weeks afterward, the thing that would wake her from half-sleep with her heart already pounding before she was fully conscious. "My son could have married anyone. He chose to bring home someone who will never, never be accepted as a Kang. Not by the families who matter. Not by this city. Not by me." She paused, and her voice when she continued was almost gentle, the way a blade is smooth before it cuts. "I love my son. Which is why I'm telling you directly what everyone else in this room has been too polite to say. You are a beautiful woman, I'm sure, in your own world. But this is not your world. It never will be. And the kindest thing you could do for Taejin, for his future, is to stop pretending that it is." The fire in the hearth made a small sound. Somewhere in the kitchen, a door closed. Vanessa did not look away. She sat with Madame Kang's words the way you sometimes have to sit with pain, not welcoming it, not fleeing it, just acknowledging that it exists and that it found you, and that you are still here anyway, still breathing, still present, still you. "Is that everything?" she asked. Madame Kang looked almost surprised. "I beg your pardon?" "Is that everything you wanted to say?" Vanessa's voice was even, not cold, not wounded, even, like a table is level. "Because I want to make sure I've heard all of it." She hadn't heard all of it. That became clear over the next 40 minutes, as the room seemed to collectively decide that the boundary had already been crossed, and there was no particular reason to maintain the pretense of civility they'd arrived with. Suyun mentioned, almost in passing, that she'd heard from a mutual connection that Vanessa's family in Atlanta was working class, and said it with a kind of deliberate delicacy that was somehow more degrading than contempt. The unnamed cousin on Suyun's left laughed. Minji commented that Vanessa's dress, which Taijin had selected and gifted for her birthday, she had put it on that morning with her hands slightly unsteady with the pleasure of being known that well by someone, was a bold choice for someone with her coloring. Vanessa noted the phrase, her coloring. She filed it alongside the others. She was building something in her chest that she could not quite name. Not anger exactly, though anger was part of it. Something more structural, something that would take time to understand. She did not cry. She had made herself a promise a long time ago, standing in a school hallway at 14 being told by two girls with perfect ponytails that she was trying too hard, and she had decided then that she would not spend her tears on people who would take satisfaction in them. It was the kind of promise that costs you something to keep. She kept it anyway. What she did instead was go very quiet. Not the quiet of someone who has given up. The quiet of someone who has decided to remember everything, every word, every laugh, every moment of eye contact shared between the women in this room over something said at her expense. She was cataloging it with a precision that surprised even her, and somewhere in the back of her mind, past the hurt, and past the rising tide of something that felt like grief. Grief for the birthday she'd been foolish enough to hope might be simple and good. She was aware that she was doing this because it was the only thing she could do that they couldn't take from her. She could remember. Minjae was in the middle of a story whose punchline Vanessa had lost track of because she'd stopped listening to the words and started listening to the room, when she became aware of a change in the air near the hallway. It was small, barely a shift. The way a room changes when a door somewhere far away opens, affecting the pressure just slightly. None of the women seemed to notice, but Vanessa noticed. She wasn't sure why she looked toward the hallway. Later she would think that some part of her, the part that had learned to read rooms the way other people read text, the survival-adjacent instinct that growing up as the only one in certain spaces will sharpen in you whether you want it to or not, simply knew that something had changed. She looked toward the hallway. The light was dim there, the overhead switched off, only the ambient glow from the sitting room reaching into it. She could not see anything clearly, but she had the sudden, distinct, unexplainable certainty that she was not the only one listening. And then Minjae said, louder now, with the confidence of someone who had decided to land the largest thing she'd been holding in reserve. Honestly, the tragedy of all this is that Taejin genuinely believes he's in love. He always does things completely. That's who he is. But he'll understand eventually, he'll have to understand, that what he needs for his life going forward isn't someone he fell for out of some rebellious impulse. She looked directly at Vanessa. It's a proper Korean wife. Someone who fits. Someone the families will accept. Someone who belongs here. She let that settle for exactly one beat. And when he comes to that conclusion, it would be better for everyone, including you, if you'd already made peace with the fact that this was never going to last. The room waited. Vanessa opened her mouth. She wasn't sure what she was going to say. She had too many things available to her and not enough certainty about which one she trusted herself to deliver without her voice breaking, and she absolutely refused, to let her voice break in front of these women. She never found out what she would have said, because from the hallway came a sound, a single, unhurried footstep on the marble floor, and then another. And then Kang Taijin walked out of the shadows and into the light of the room. His family had turned into an arena, and every word in every throat went silent at once, and his mother's hand jerked so suddenly that her teacup tipped from its saucer and hit the table with a sound like a small bell being struck once and left to ring. He looked at his mother. He looked at his sister. He looked at every face in that room with the particular expression of a man who has made a decision and is simply waiting for the appropriate moment to announce it. And then he looked at Vanessa, and something in his face changed, something private, something that wasn't for anyone else in the room. And he crossed the space between them without a word, and took her hand in both of his, and held it the way you hold something you are terrified of having almost lost. The room was so silent, Vanessa could hear herself breathing. Taejin turned slowly to face his family. "How long?" he said, his voice completely level, completely quiet. "Have you been doing this?" It was not a question either. He was still holding her hand. That was the thing nobody in the room could stop looking at. Not Madame Kang, not Min Jae, not Su Yeon, or the cousins who had driven an hour to witness what they'd assumed would be a quiet, comfortable afternoon of consequence-free cruelty. Taejin was standing in the middle of his own sitting room holding his wife's hand like it was the only fixed point in a world that had just tilted sideways, and his face was doing something none of them had seen before. Not anger. They knew his anger. They had all, at various points in their lives, been in the room when Kang Taejin's anger surfaced, and it looked nothing like this. His anger was loud in the way thunder is loud. You felt it before you heard it, and when it arrived, it left no ambiguity about what it was. This was different. This was the face of a man performing a kind of internal surgery on himself in real time, cutting away something and deciding, with each passing second of silence, not to reattach it. "How long?" he said again. His mother opened her mouth, closed it. Min Jae was the one who spoke, and later Vanessa would think that this said something important about who Min Jae fundamentally was. That even caught, even exposed, her first instinct was to try to control the narrative before anyone else could. "Taejin, you're misunderstanding." "I'm not." His voice was quiet enough that everyone leaned forward slightly without realizing they were doing it. "I was in the hallway. I heard from the part where So-yeon started talking about Vanessa's family." He paused. One beat, two. "I heard all of it, Min Jae." Min Jae's jaw moved. Nothing came out. Soo-yeon had gone a specific shade of pale that Vanessa associated with people who had just realized the exit they were counting on didn't exist. Taejin finally looked away from his sister and at his mother, and Vanessa felt his grip on her hand tighten by a fraction. Not painfully, just the way a person's hand tightens when they're bracing for something. "Yama," he said. The Korean word for mother, and the way he said it, not gently, not with accusation, but with a kind of exhausted precision, made it sound like a door closing. Madame Kang straightened her spine. She was 61 years old, and she had buried a husband and built a family from the ruins of his death. And she was not, her posture communicated clearly, going to be made to feel small in a room she was sitting in. "I said what needed to be said," she told him. "That has always been my role. You may be angry with me for it, but I will not apologize for protecting this family." "Protecting this family?" Taejin repeated. "Yes. From my wife." Madame Kang's chin lifted a half centimeter. "From a situation that threatens everything we've spent 30 years building. I know you don't want to hear that." "I know it isn't what I want," Taejin said, still in that same quiet register, the one that was beginning to make Min Jae's left knee bounce under the table, "is for you to look at the woman standing next to me and understand what you've done today." "I understand exactly what I've done." "No." Something shifted in his voice, not louder, just denser, like a cord pulled taut. "You don't. Because if you understood it, you wouldn't be sitting there defending it." The fire in the hearth made its small sound again. The heating system hummed. Somewhere in the back of the house, one of the staff was moving quietly, professionally pretending that none of this was happening, which was the particular skill that working for Kang Taejin required you to develop. Vanessa had not moved. She was standing beside him with her hand in his, and her face doing the thing it did when she was working very hard to stay level, a kind of deliberate stillness, like water that is choosing not to ripple. She was watching Madame Kang the way you watch weather that hasn't decided yet what it's going to become. Then Min Jae made her second mistake. "You're overreacting," she said, and her voice had recovered some of its usual evenness, the one she used in boardrooms when she wanted to redirect a conversation she was losing. "We had a conversation, an honest one that clearly needed to happen." Taejin looked at his sister. He didn't say anything for long enough that Min Jae's composure developed a hairline crack, just visible in the slight tightening around her eyes. "An honest conversation," he said finally. "Yes. You told my wife she would never last, that she doesn't belong here, that I would eventually leave her for someone more appropriate." A pause. "That's your version of honesty." "It's the truth that everyone is thinking and no one is willing to say." "It's not the truth," Taejin said. "It's what you want to be true. There's a difference. You've always had trouble with that distinction." Min Jae's nostrils flared. "Don't talk to me like I'm one of your subordinates." Then don't act like you're above accountability. His voice finally picked up an edge, just slightly, like a knife being turned so the light catches the blade. You're my sister. I have loved you my entire life. And I am standing here telling you that what I heard today was one of the worst things I have ever seen someone do to another person. And you did it to my wife, in my house, on her birthday, while I was gone. And your first move, when I walked in the door, was to tell me I'm overreacting. The room had gone completely still. Even the cousins, who had spent most of the afternoon as an audience, seemed to have understood that they were no longer watching. They were now participants, and the exit from that particular category was not immediately clear. Min-jae said, more quietly now, "Taejin, I'm not finished." She stopped. He looked around the room, a slow, deliberate survey, the kind of look that Vanessa had seen him give a room exactly once before, at a business meeting where someone had tried to pass off manipulated data as legitimate figures, and which had preceded the quiet and total destruction of that person's professional relationship with every entity the Kong name touched. "I need everyone who is not my wife or my mother to leave this room," he said. "Now." Soyeon stood up immediately. She grabbed her bag with the speed of someone who had been waiting for permission to remove herself from a situation that had escalated well past what she'd signed up for. The unnamed cousins followed, one of them catching her tea glass as she rose and setting it down with exaggerated care, like noise might make things worse. Min-jae didn't move. "Min-jae," his voice was very flat. "This is a family matter." "You're right. That's why I'm asking you to give me 10 minutes with our mother before we discuss your part in this." His eyes held hers without any warmth in them at all. "Unless you'd prefer to have that conversation right now." Something moved across Minji's face. Calculation, Vanessa thought. The weighing of options. Minji was genuinely intelligent, and her intelligence was of the type that was always running a parallel assessment of every situation for weaknesses and leverage points. You could see her doing it. You could see the exact moment she decided that a tactical retreat now would give her better positioning later. She stood, smoothed her jacket, looked at Vanessa once, a look that lasted less than a second and contained multitudes, and walked out of the room without another word. The door to the hallway didn't close behind her. It drifted, not quite shut, leaving a 2-inch gap through which the sound of heels on marble faded slowly toward the far end of the house. Then there were 3 of them, Taejin, Vanessa, and Madame Kang. Taejin released Vanessa's hand. He turned to her, and his face did the private thing again, the thing that wasn't for anyone watching. "Give me a few minutes," he said. Low, just for her. Vanessa looked at him. She read his face the way she'd learned to read it over 3 years. The topography of it, which expressions indicated which internal weather systems. What she saw now was not rage. It was something older than rage and more deliberate. It was a man who had made a decision and needed space to execute it. "I'll be in the kitchen," she said. She walked out of the room without looking at Madame Kang. This was intentional. The decision not to look was the most powerful thing she'd done all afternoon, and she knew it, and she let herself know it as she moved down the hallway. Let herself feel, for the first time since the black car had appeared in the courtyard, like she still had something that belonged entirely to her. The kitchen was quiet. In the way large, professionally equipped kitchens are quiet when no one is actively working in them. A low hum from the refrigeration units, the faint tick of cooling metal. Vanessa sat on a stool at the center island and put both palms flat on the cold marble surface and breathed. In, out. She was not going to take inventory right now. She had learned that the middle of a crisis was the wrong time to count your losses. You did that after, when the ground was still again, and you could look at the damage with clear eyes and decide what was worth salvaging and what you had to let go. Right now, she just needed to breathe and keep her hands flat and stay present. She heard, faintly, from the direction of the sitting room, the beginning of Taejin's voice. She couldn't make out words. The house was too large, the acoustics too designed for privacy. She heard only the tone, still quiet, but changed now from the earlier quietness. This was the tone of a man no longer managing himself. Then she heard Madame Kang's voice in response, higher, more strained, then Taejin again, then silence. Then clearly enough that the distance and the walls couldn't muffle it, Madame Kang, her voice breaking for the first time in a way Vanessa had never heard before, saying something in Korean that Vanessa did not catch in full, but in which she heard clearly the word for family and the word for understand, and the word that meant roughly, "You're choosing wrong." Then silence again. Long enough that Vanessa's hands pressed harder into the marble. Then the sound of heels. Not Min Jae's heels. Different, slower, the gait of someone moving with damaged dignity, each step carefully placed. Coming toward the kitchen. Vanessa kept her eyes forward. Madame Kong appeared in the kitchen doorway. She stopped there. She didn't come further in. Her silver hair was still perfect. It would have taken more than an argument to disturb her silver hair, but something around her eyes had loosened, some architectural element that Vanessa had never seen unstructured before. She looked for a moment like what she actually was, a 61-year-old woman who had just had the worst conversation of her recent life and knew there were more to come. She looked at Vanessa. Vanessa looked back. Neither of them spoke for a moment. Then Madame Kong said quietly, in English, and she spoke careful, deliberate English when she chose to, though she usually chose not to, "He will not be moved." Vanessa said nothing. "I want you to understand," Madame Kang continued, and her voice had a quality now that Vanessa did not know how to categorize, somewhere between pride and something cracked running underneath the pride, "that what I said today, I said it because I believe it. I am not sorry for believing it. I may be sorry for the manner." A pause. "I may be." Vanessa waited. "He looks at you," Madame Kang said, "the way his father looked at me. Before everything." Another pause, longer. Something was happening in her face that she was working not to let happen, and she was only partially successful. "I know what it costs to be looked at that way. I know what you stand to lose." Vanessa said, very carefully, "Then you know what he stands to lose if this continues." Madame Kang's jaw moved. Her eyes went sharp again for a moment. The old precision returning, the habit of a lifetime, the armor going back up before she was fully aware of reaching for it. "Yes," she said, "just that." Then she turned and walked through the kitchen toward the secondary exit, and Vanessa heard the house door open and close, and the sound of gravel under departing tires. Taejin found her still sitting at the island. He came in and stood across from her and put both hands on the marble, mirroring her without realizing it, and for a moment they just looked at each other the way people who have survived the same storm sometimes look at each other. Not triumphant, not exactly relieved, just present. "Still here." "She's gone?" Vanessa asked. "They're all gone." She nodded slowly. "Min Jae too?" "Min Jae is currently in her car in the driveway having what I imagine is an extraordinarily uncomfortable phone call with her assistant." He paused. "She'll leave when she's finished." Vanessa almost smiled. Not quite. Taejin looked at her face, really looked, the way he did sometimes when he was trying to understand something she hadn't said. "How bad was it before I came in?" She considered lying. Not maliciously. Just the particular softening that you do sometimes to protect someone you love from a specific weight of knowledge. She considered it and discarded it because he'd asked her directly. And because they had, from the beginning of their relationship, agreed not to lie to each other even when the truth was uncomfortable. And she wasn't going to let today be the first time she broke that agreement. "Bad," she said. "It was bad, Taejin." His hands pressed flat against the marble. His eyes moved away from hers and found a fixed point somewhere past her left shoulder and stayed there for a moment. "I'm sorry," he said. "Stop." Her voice was firm. Not angry. Firm. "Don't apologize for them. That's not your apology to make. I brought you into this family. You brought me into a marriage. The family came with it." She paused. "That's not something you could have prevented. That's something we have to deal with now." He looked back at her. "I handled it." "I know. I mean, Taejin." She met his eyes. "I know. I heard enough." She looked down at her hands on the marble. "Your mother said something before she left. She said you wouldn't be moved." "No, I won't." She looked. Vanessa stopped, tried to find the right word. "She looked like someone who's never been told no by you before." "She hasn't. Not on something like this." His jaw was tight. He was working something through. She could see it in the way his right thumb was pressing against the edge of the marble over and over. a tell she'd noticed in their first year and never mentioned. My father died when I was 19. I became this person everyone answered to very quickly, and my mother, she has certain ideas about what that means, what the family is, what it requires. His voice was controlled, but underneath it something was moving, something with weight. I should have corrected those ideas a long time ago. You couldn't have known she'd do this. I could have made it clear that this would be the consequence if she did. He looked up. I made it soft, Nessa. I kept the peace with them because it was easier than the alternative, and you paid for that today. She absorbed this. She turned it over. Then we don't make it soft anymore, she said. He held her gaze, and then he said, No, we don't. Minji was still in the driveway 40 minutes later. Taejin had gone to his study. Vanessa had gone upstairs to change out of the dress, the birthday dress, which she folded carefully and put in the closet and would not decide until later whether she could ever wear it again. And when she came back down in something comfortable and found a glass of water and sat in the small sunroom off the main corridor, she could see through the window the white roof of Min-jae's car, still there, engine presumably running. She thought about what it would feel like to be Min-jae right now. She tried, genuinely, because she'd found over the years that understanding the interior of people who hurt you was not the same as excusing them. It was just a different kind of survival skill, the one that kept you from being permanently defined by how they treated you. Min-jae was 37. She had worked inside the Kong family's business infrastructure for 12 years. She had, by every external measure, achieved exactly what she was supposed to achieve. She was smart and controlled, and she had spent her entire adult life operating in the specific gravity field of her brother's authority. And she had learned, as people do when they grow up adjacent to power rather than holding it, to exercise the influence she had in the spaces where she could. And today she had chosen the wrong space and the wrong target, and she had been caught. And now she was sitting in her car in the driveway, working out the dimensions of the hole she'd dug. Vanessa didn't feel sorry for her. She wanted to be clear with herself about that. She did not feel sorry for Min-jae. What Min-jae had done today was deliberate, calculated, and cruel, and the fact that Vanessa could construct a psychological framework for why didn't soften what it had felt like to sit in that room and absorb it. But she noticed she wasn't feeling triumphant either. She was feeling tired. Not defeated, just tired in the way that a long exposure to something painful makes you tired, even if you endured it with your dignity intact. Especially then, maybe. Because endurance costs something, and nobody talks enough about the bill that comes after. She heard footsteps in the hallway. Too light for Taejin. She turned. Min-jae was standing in the doorway to the sunroom. Vanessa went still. Min-jae looked like she'd been in her car for 40 minutes, having an extraordinarily uncomfortable experience. Her composure was present but under obvious strain, the way a bridge looks when you can see the cables working. She wasn't wearing her jacket anymore. She'd left it somewhere. Without it, she looked younger and slightly less formidable, which Vanessa suspected was not an effect she would have approved of. He won't see me, Min-jae said. I know. I knocked on the study. He said. She stopped. He didn't say much. Vanessa waited. Min-jae looked at her. There was something in her face that Vanessa hadn't seen there before. Not softness, not exactly, but something adjacent to it. Something that had been forced to the surface by the events of the afternoon and wasn't sitting comfortably there. I came to... She stopped again. Her jaw worked. I'm not... This isn't me saying that what I believe is wrong. I know, Vanessa said, but the way it was said... Min-jae's voice had a rough edge to it, something abraded. Some of the things that were said, by me, and by Soo-yeon, which... A breath. I should have stopped her. I didn't. Vanessa looked at her carefully. She was measuring something. Not Min-jae's sincerity, exactly, because she wasn't sure sincerity was quite what this was. She was measuring whether this conversation was something she wanted to have right now, with this woman, in this state, on today of all days. She decided she was too tired for half measures. What do you actually want, Min-jae? She asked. Not from this conversation. I mean, what do you actually want? For Taejin, for your family, for yourself. What is it? Min-jae blinked. It was a small reaction but visible, the response of someone who had been preparing for something other than a direct question. I want my brother to be safe, she said after a moment. From me. From a situation he can't fully control. Minji's voice found its footing a little. Taejin he doesn't do things by half. When he loves something, he gives it everything, and he doesn't measure the cost. He never has. Our father was the same way. Something moved across her face. Our father also died at 53 from stress-related cardiac failure, so... Vanessa absorbed this. So your concern, she said slowly, is that he's going to hurt himself. My concern, Minji said, is that he's going to choose you over everything, over the family, over the business, over the relationships we spent decades building. And then one day the cost of all those choices will land on him and you will not be enough of a reason to justify it. And you are going to prevent that by convincing me to leave. Minji said nothing, which was its own answer. That's a long way around, Vanessa said, to telling someone you don't think they're worth it. It's what it felt like. Vanessa's voice was still level, still even. You sat in that room and you made it very clear that I am less than what this family deserves. That I am a phase. That my marriage is a mistake he'll correct eventually. You said it in front of an audience that you'd gathered specifically for that purpose, on my birthday, while my husband was away. She paused. Let that sit. You can tell me your intentions were about protection. But intentions and impact are two different things, and the impact of today on me is not something you get to decide for me. Minji was very still. I'm not going to tell Taejin to forgive you, Vanessa continued. That's not my thing to give. I'm not going to tell you we're fine, because we're not fine, and we may not be for a long time. She looked at her steadily. But I will tell you this. I'm not going anywhere. I was here before today, and I will be here after it. So whatever idea you and your mother have been maintaining about the temporary nature of this marriage, you need to let that go. Because it is going to keep causing damage that none of us can afford. Minjae's mouth opened, closed. Then she said very quietly, he chose the hallway. Vanessa looked at her. He could have come in when he first arrived, Minji said. He stood in that hallway, and he listened, and he let it go on. Her eyes were sharp again, but differently sharp now. Not calculating, something more uncomfortable than that. He wanted to know how far we'd go. The words landed in the room and didn't leave. Vanessa turned this over. She thought about the 2-inch gap in the sitting room door that she'd noticed when she left. About how long she'd had the certainty of another presence before Taejin appeared. About the way his bodyguards had apparently stopped moving, which she hadn't known until now, but which Minjae had apparently registered. He wanted to know, Minji said again, more to herself now than to Vanessa, so he'd know what he was actually dealing with. And now he knows, Vanessa said. Minji looked at her, something in her face that Vanessa could not quite read. Grief, maybe. Grief adjacent. The particular expression of someone who has understood, fully and too late, that they have done something they cannot undo. Yes, Minji said. Now he knows. She left without saying anything else. Vanessa heard the front door, the crunch of gravel, the sound of an engine turning and then fading down the driveway and becoming silence. She sat in the sunroom alone. The light was changing outside, the afternoon going gold and thin the way February afternoons do in Seoul, the sun dropping faster than it feels like it should. Somewhere inside the house, she heard the study door open. Footsteps in the hall. The particular rhythm of Taejin's walk, which she could identify by now as easily as his voice. He appeared in the sunroom doorway. He looked at her for a moment, looked at the empty doorway she'd been looking at. She came in, he said. Yes. What did she say? Vanessa considered this. She said you stood in the hallway on purpose, she said, to find out how far they'd go. The silence that followed was not the silence of a man caught out. It was something more complicated. He came into the room and sat across from her and put his forearms on his knees and looked at the floor for a moment before looking up. Yes, he said. She held his gaze. How long have you suspected something like today was possible? He took a breath. Let it out slowly. Longer than I should have let it go without addressing it. How long, Taejin? A pause. Since the Hanam dinner. Director Zhang told me afterward, very discreetly, that my mother had said something to his wife during the cocktail hour. About the marriage. About... His jaw tightened. About whether it would last. 8 months ago. The dinner Vanessa had referenced in the sitting room, The one she'd walked out of feeling good about. The one she'd told herself was evidence that she was managing this world correctly. 8 months. "You didn't tell me," she said. "No." "Why?" The question was simple, and it sat between them with its full weight, and he didn't try to minimize it. "Because I thought I could manage it," he said. "I thought if I spoke to my mother privately, if I made the parameters clear without making it a confrontation, it would settle." His hands pressed together. "I was wrong. I underestimated what she was willing to do when she thought I wasn't watching." Vanessa was quiet for a long moment. She was trying to do the honest inventory now, the things she'd told herself to wait for. She was looking at what today had actually been and what had led to it, and she was trying to decide what she felt about the part where the person she trusted most had known, for 8 months, that there was a threat gathering and had chosen to manage it quietly rather than bring it to her. "You kept me in the dark," she said, "to protect me from something you thought you could handle." "Yes." "And instead it happened on my birthday with an audience." "Yes." His voice was rough now, the control fraying at the edges. "Yes, Nessa, that is exactly what happened. And I will spend a long time understanding what I owe you for that." She looked at him, this man she had chosen, who was not perfect, who had made a call 8 months ago that she would not have made, who had stood in a hallway tonight and listened to his family strip her down because he needed to know the truth of it before he acted, who had walked out of those shadows and taken her hand. She looked at all of it, the full complicated portrait of him, and she did not look away. "I need you to promise me something," she said. "Anything. No more managing things without me. Whatever comes next, from your mother, from Min-jae, from whoever decides to take a position on our marriage, I am not a problem you handle quietly in the background. I am your partner." She held his gaze. "That means I'm in the room when the decisions get made. All of them." He looked at her for a long time. "Yes," he said. "I promise." She nodded slowly. The gold light through the sunroom window had gone almost amber now. The orchids she'd arranged that morning were in the foyer where she'd left them, some stems taller than others, the way real things grow. Outside, the estate was silent. Every car that had arrived that afternoon was gone. The evening had closed over the day like water over a stone, and underneath that water, down in the deep quiet, something had changed permanently. "What are you going to do?" she asked. "About your mother, about Min-jae." He was quiet for a moment. "What I should have done 8 months ago," he said, and in his voice, beneath the exhaustion and the control and the complex grief of a man who had just decided to cut something necessary from himself, she heard it. The irreversible quality of a decision that has already been made and is only waiting for morning to be executed. There was no version of tomorrow that looked like today. She understood, with absolute clarity, that whatever Kang Taijin had been willing to tolerate before this night no longer existed, and that the consequences of today had not finished arriving. They were only just beginning. He made the calls at 6 in the morning. Vanessa knew because she woke at 5:58 to the sound of him already dressed, already moving through the bedroom with the quiet efficiency of a man who had not slept and had stopped pretending that he might. She watched him from the bed without speaking, watched him button his shirt in the dark, watched him check his phone, watched him stand at the window for exactly 11 seconds, looking out at the pre-dawn Seoul skyline before he turned and saw her watching him. "Go back to sleep," he said. "You haven't slept." "No." She sat up. "Taejin, I need to make some calls before 7, he said. "Business decisions that should have been made a long time ago. I'll explain everything when I'm done." He looked at her across the dark room. "I promise." She let him go. Not because she had nothing to say, but because she recognized the set of his jaw and the particular stillness around his eyes that meant he was already in motion, and the most useful thing she could do was not stand in the path of it. She heard him go down the stairs, heard the study door close, heard, faintly, the low register of his voice beginning, controlled, precise, the voice he used when he was instructing rather than discussing. She lay back and stared at the ceiling and listened to the house breathe around her. At 6:47, her own phone buzzed. She almost didn't look at it. She assumed it was her sister following up on the birthday voice note, or possibly a notification from some app she kept meaning to delete. She reached for it with the automatic disinterest of someone whose mind is already occupied with larger things. The number was Korean, not saved in her contacts. The message was in English, which meant it was for her specifically, not accidentally misdirected. It read, "You should ask your husband what he agreed to 6 months ago, before you let him play the hero. A friend." She sat up. She read it again. She put the phone face down on the nightstand and sat with her hands on her knees and breathed for a moment. The message had the specific quality of something designed to destabilize. The vagueness of the accusation, the timing, the anonymous framing, the poisonous little quotation marks implicit in "play the hero." It had the fingerprints of someone who knew exactly what they were doing. She picked the phone back up, read it a third time, took a screenshot, put it back down. Then she got up, got dressed, and went downstairs. The study door was still closed. She knocked twice, the way they'd agreed. 2 knocks meant "I need to talk," not urgent, and heard him say "come in." He was behind his desk with 3 folders open in front of him and his phone in his hand, mid-note. He looked up when she entered and something in his face registered her expression immediately. "What happened?" he said. She held out her phone. He read the message. She watched his face while he read it, watched carefully, the way she'd promised herself she would watch carefully from now on. Not with suspicion, but with the honest attention that a person owes their own life. His face did something she hadn't predicted. It didn't go blank, it didn't go hard. It went tired. A specific, heavy tiredness, like a man who has been carrying a weight he thought no one would ever ask him about and has just been asked. Her stomach dropped. "Tajin." Her voice was very quiet. He set the phone down on the desk. He did not look away from it immediately. He put both hands flat on the desk surface. The same mirroring gesture from last night in the kitchen, the one she now understood was his body's response to needing something solid. "I was going to tell you today," he said. The room went very still. "Tell me what?" she said. He finally looked up. His eyes were clear. Not evasive, not calculating, just tired in that deep structure way. The tiredness of a man who has known something was coming and has been dreading it without knowing how to accelerate its arrival. "6 months ago," he said, "my mother came to me with a proposal." Vanessa did not move. "There is a family," he continued, the Park family, Park Sung-ho specifically. He runs the second largest private logistics infrastructure in the country. For years, our 2 operations have run parallel with an uncomfortable amount of overlap. Competition that both families would benefit from resolving. He paused. "My mother arranged a meeting. She presented it as a business discussion. I went. And," Vanessa said, "and Park Sung-ho's daughter was there." His jaw moved. "So Yul, 29, educated in London, works in the family operation. She was—" He stopped. "My mother had arranged it as an introduction. Not formal. Deniable, if necessary, but deliberate." Vanessa's hands were very still at her sides. "I left the meeting," he said. "I told my mother afterward that if she did something like that again, I would restructure her involvement in every family entity she had a hand in. I thought—" He exhaled. "I thought the message had been received." "But," Vanessa said, "but 6 months ago, before I said that to her, there was a document." His voice was controlled, but she could hear the cost of that control now, the fuel it was burning. "My mother she had drawn up a preliminary agreement between our family's legal representation and the Parks, a framework document for a merger discussion." A pause. "It referenced the possibility of a marital alliance as a mechanism for solidifying the business relationship." The silence was absolute. "A marital alliance," Vanessa repeated, a phrase in a preliminary document that never— "Taijin." Her voice cut through cleanly, not raised, just precise. "Are you telling me that 6 months ago, while we were married, your mother drafted a document that proposed you marry someone else?" "A preliminary document that I—" "Answer the question." He met her eyes. "Yes." She turned away from him. She walked to the window, the same window he'd stood at in the dark 40 minutes ago, and looked out at Seoul in the early morning, the city already moving, already indifferent, the way cities always are when your personal architecture is falling down. She pressed 2 fingers to her lips and stood there for a moment. She was doing the thing she'd trained herself to do in moments of shock: locate the ground, find one true thing, and stand on it. The city outside was real. The glass under her fingertips was cold and real. She was standing in a room with a man she had chosen and trusted, and she had just learned that the war she'd survived yesterday had a history she hadn't been given access to. She turned around. "Who sent that message?" she said. "I don't know yet." "Guess." His eyes moved slightly, calculating. "Someone who knew about the document. That limits it to my mother's attorney, the park's representation. Possibly someone inside the park's family office who was aware of the discussion." He paused. "Possibly Soil herself." "Why would she send it to me?" "To create damage," he said. "Or to create leverage. Or both." "Leverage for what?" "I don't know yet." He stood from behind the desk. "Nessa, don't." She put her hand up. Not angry. She would examine that later, the surprising absence of rage, and understand that what she was feeling was more fundamental than rage, was the thing that lives underneath rage, which is the vertigo of realizing the map you've been using doesn't match the territory. "Don't manage me right now. Give me a minute." He stopped. He stayed where he was and gave her the minute she asked for, which cost him something. She could see it costing him. The stillness of a man who wants to act and is holding himself back. And she registered this distantly as one piece of evidence in an ongoing assessment she was making of the totality of what she had learned in the last 12 hours. She turned back to the window. She thought about yesterday, about the sitting room and Madame Kang's voice and the precise cruelty of everything that had been said, and she placed it now against this new information and looked at the shape the two things made together. A document proposing her husband's remarriage, a staged afternoon of humiliation, an anonymous message timed for the morning after. These were not separate events. She turned around. "This was coordinated," she said. Taejin's eyes sharpened. "Yesterday wasn't just your mother deciding to say what she'd been thinking," Vanessa said. "She came here with an audience. She said specific things. She made sure I heard them in a specific order, ending with Min Jae's line about you eventually leaving me for someone appropriate." She looked at him. She was making a case. Not to me. She knew I wouldn't be persuaded. She was making a case that she knew you might overhear. He was very still. "She knew you came home early," Vanessa said, "or she suspected it, or she was prepared for the possibility. Because none of it was improvised, Taejin. The things she said were too structured for grief or impulse. She was performing something." She watched him work through it, watched the exact moment it landed. "She was showing me the alternative," he said slowly. "If you were gone, what the family could look like, what she'd already built toward." His voice had gone flat. The controlled flatness that she now understood was not the absence of emotion, but its compression into something extremely dense. "She wanted me to see the blueprint." "The document is 6 months old," Vanessa said. "The parks have been in this conversation for 6 months, and yesterday someone made sure I knew about it this morning." She picked up her phone from where she'd left it on the corner of his desk and looked at the message again. "Someone who wants me destabilized. Or someone who wants me to know that the parks have someone on the inside," he said. She looked at him. "If the message came from the park's side," he said, "it means they're not just passive participants in whatever my mother arranged. It means they have an active interest in the outcome." His jaw tightened, "which means this isn't about my mother trying to manage my marriage. This is bigger than that." "How much bigger?" Vanessa said carefully. He didn't answer immediately. He moved to his desk and opened the middle drawer and removed a folder. Physical, paper, the kind of document you print when you don't want a digital trail, and held it for a moment without opening it. "I've been in a conflict with Park Sung-go for 3 years," he said. "Not visible. Nothing that would show up in public records or business reporting, but real." He looked at the folder. "He wants our northern logistics network, the infrastructure we built in Incheon specifically. He's been trying to acquire access to it through various means, partner negotiations that went nowhere, 2 attempted buyouts of our subsidiary operations, a smear campaign through one of his media connections that I shut down 18 months ago." He set the folder on the desk. "I assumed the alliance proposal my mother brought to me was her own idea, her own solution to a problem she had decided to solve without my input." He was quiet for a moment. "I'm now wondering if the idea was his." The morning light through the window had shifted from gray to pale gold. The city was fully awake now, indifferent and continuous. "You're saying Park Sung-ho may have gone to your mother," Vanessa said slowly, "and proposed the marriage himself, as a way to get access to your network." It It would be elegant, he said, and the word was not a compliment. My mother wants the family's alliances strengthened. She wants me remarried to someone she approves of. He wants the Incheon network. Both problems solved by one arrangement. He paused. And I have a wife who complicates the picture. Vanessa heard what he didn't say. She heard it very clearly. I complicate the picture, she said. Vanessa, no, say it. I need to hear it said out loud. She was not going to let this get soft and managed. Your wife is an obstacle to a business deal that your mother and possibly Park Sung-ho have been building for 6 months. Yesterday was designed, at least in part, to remove that obstacle. And this morning someone sent me a message to make sure I knew about the deal, which either means they want me to run— She heard the steadiness in her own voice and was faintly surprised by it. Or they want me to take some action that creates a crisis they can use. Yes, he said, that's what it means. She absorbed this, the full shape of it. She had walked into yesterday thinking she was navigating family prejudice, difficult, painful, survivable. She was waking up this morning understanding that what she was actually inside was a deliberate, architecturally sophisticated campaign to remove her from her own marriage, orchestrated by her mother-in-law in coordination with a man who wanted her husband's business assets, executed through a combination of emotional cruelty, legal documentation, and this morning's anonymous precision strike. The ground under her had not shifted. It had been removed entirely, and she was only now looking down. She needed air. She told him she needed 20 minutes, and she walked out of the study and through the house and out the side door into the estate's rear garden, which in February was stripped and angular, the ornamental trees bare, the ground hard. She walked to the far end where there was a stone bench she'd sat on exactly once before, last March, after a difficult phone call with her mother about money, the kind of call that reminded you that distance didn't simplify the people you came from, it just changed the medium. She sat on it now. The cold came through her clothes immediately. She didn't move. She was trying to find the anger. She expected it to be there, waiting, the clean, hot version of it that tells you what to do and gives you somewhere to put all the energy of a crisis. It wasn't there. What was there instead was something more difficult, clarity. The cold, flat, comprehensive clarity that comes when you've been shown a situation in its full dimensions and there's nothing left to misunderstand. Her marriage was a target, not metaphorically, not in the vague sense of people who didn't approve, a literal, coordinated, resource target. And the man she had married had known for 6 months that the territory was mine without telling her where the mines were, and one of them had just gone off. She heard the side door open. She didn't turn around. She knew his footsteps. He sat beside her on the bench without asking. In the cold, without a jacket. He'd come out without a jacket, which meant he'd come immediately, which meant he hadn't stood in the study weighing the decision to follow her. She registered this, filed it. I should have told you about the document the day I found out about it, he said. Yes, I made a decision to protect you from information that was mine to act on. I thought that was the right call. A pause. I understand now that it was the wrong one. Why didn't you tell me? She turned to look at him. Honestly, not the management version of the answer, the actual reason. He looked at the bare garden for a moment. He rubbed the back of his neck, a gesture she'd seen rarely, the one that meant he was working through something he didn't have a polished version of. Because I was ashamed, he said. She hadn't expected that. My mother did something in my name, he said. She used the Kong name, my legal representation, to build a document that, while I was married to you, while I was in a room buying you orchids for your birthday, she was 3 floors away constructing an argument for your replacement. His voice was careful, but underneath it something was raw and exposed, like a wire stripped of its insulation. I was ashamed of my family, and I was afraid that if you knew, it would change something between us that I couldn't afford to change. What's something? She said. Your certainty, he said, about us, about whether this was a life you'd chosen or a situation you'd been installed in. He looked at her directly. You've never been the kind of person who needs to be protected. You've told me that. I believed you. But I was afraid that this specific thing, my mother actively working to end our marriage while I told you everything was fine, would make you look at us differently, would make you question whether any of it was real or whether you were just a piece on a board, she said quietly. Yes. She looked at him. She looked at this man who was not perfect, who had made a bad call out of fear dressed up as protection, who was sitting on a freezing stone bench in February without a jacket because he'd followed her immediately. She looked at all of it. "I am not a piece on a board," she said. "I am your wife. And the only way I can be your partner in any of this is if you treat me like the partner you promised me last night." Her voice was very direct. "I need you to understand that keeping things from me, even with good intentions, is not protection. It is a different kind of a loan." He flinched. It was small and real. "I understand," he said. "Good." She looked back at the garden. "Then we deal with this together, all of it. Park Sung-ho, your mother's involvement, whoever sent that message, and what they want." She paused. "And Tae-jin, I need to know. Is there anything else? Anything from before today that you decided to manage without me?" The silence stretched for 3 seconds. 4. She felt it before he spoke. "There's one more thing," he said. The one more thing took 40 minutes to explain. They went back inside because the cold had moved past uncomfortable into something neither of them was dressed for, and he brought her to the study and sat across from her. Not behind the desk, beside her, in the 2 chairs that faced the window. And he started from a place that was further back than she'd expected. 2 years ago, before the wedding, a conversation he'd had with his mother in which Madame Kang had laid out, with the precision of someone who had been building her case over months, every reason that the marriage was a mistake. Tae-jin had heard her out, had told her that his decision was made and not subject to revision, had believed, based on that conversation, that his mother had accepted this. What he had not known, what he had discovered 3 weeks ago, when he had started reviewing communications in his mother's office as part of a broader internal audit he'd initiated after the Hannum dinner incident, was that his mother had never accepted it. She had continued, quietly and systematically, to build the case for an alternative. She had cultivated the relationship with the Park family. She had maintained correspondence with 3 separate family law offices about the terms under which a dissolution of the marriage might be handled. She had built a file, an actual physical file, on Vanessa. Her background, her family, her finances prior to the marriage, her professional history, the cultural gap as Madame Kang framed it, contextualized and documented in a way that was designed to be shown to someone as evidence of unsuitability. Tae-jin had found the file 3 weeks ago. He had been, at that point, already deep in the planning for Vanessa's birthday celebration. Vanessa listened to this without interrupting. She sat in the chair with her hands in her lap and her face doing the calibrated stillness thing, and she listened to every word, and when he finished, she sat with it for a long moment. "She built a file on me," she said. "Yes." "An opposition file, the kind you'd use in a legal proceeding." "Yes." "3 weeks ago you found this." "Yes." "And you continued planning my birthday party." Something in his face broke slightly. "I didn't know how to tell you. I knew that as soon as you knew, everything would change. I wanted to give you the birthday first. I wanted you to have one thing that was just good," she said quietly. "You wanted me to have one thing that was just good." "Yes." She looked at her hands. She thought about the orchids, the 43 white stems, the card that said the woman who made me remember what home feels like. She thought about the birthday she had woken up to, the quiet of the big house, the voice note from her mother singing off-key, the complicated private arithmetic of measuring a life against its own expectations. She thought about the fact that the man sitting next to her had known, for 3 weeks, that his mother had built a legal file designed to end their marriage, and had spent those 3 weeks choosing violins and candles and the exact right orchids. She thought, this man is not uncomplicated. She thought, neither am I. She thought, being loved by someone imperfect is not the same as being loved by the wrong person. She said, "Where is the file now?" He looked at her. "I have it. I want to see it." "Vanessa, I want to see it," she said again. "I told you. I'm not a piece on a board. If someone built a document about my life for the purpose of erasing me from it, I want to see what they used." She met his eyes. "And then I want to understand exactly who Park Sung-ho is, what he wants, and how your mother's involvement with him changes our position." He was very still. "Our position," he said. "Our position," she confirmed. "You and me. Because this is not just an attack on our marriage anymore. It's a play for your business infrastructure. And whoever coordinated yesterday and this morning's message is escalating, which means we're not at the beginning of this. We're in the middle of it, and we've been in the middle of it without knowing it, and I need to understand the full map before I can. Her phone rang. The specific ring she'd assigned to numbers not in her contacts. 3 ascending tones, distinct, the one that usually meant a delivery notification or a spam call, but which this morning, given the context, made both of them go still immediately. She looked at the screen. The same number as the morning's message. She looked at Taijin. He nodded once. She answered and put it on speaker. Mrs. Kong. The voice was female. Korean accent, English words, very precise. Controlled in the specific way of someone who has rehearsed a short script. My name isn't important. What's important is that you understand you have until noon today before the document I referenced this morning becomes unavailable to you. Vanessa said, Unavailable how? My employer intends to file it, the voice said, with the appropriate parties, as evidence of an agreement already in progress. What agreement? Vanessa said. The merger agreement, the voice said, which, as of this morning, your husband's legal team has already signed one component of. The room stopped. Vanessa looked at Taijin. His face had gone the color of something that has lost its blood. That's not possible, he said loud enough for the speaker to carry it. I haven't signed anything. Not you, the voice said. Your representative. A pause. The document was executed this morning at 6:45. Your mother's attorney signed as authorized representative of the Kong family business interests. She had authorization paperwork on file from 18 months ago, signed by you, covering a category of business agreements that this document was structured to fall within. Taejin was already reaching for his other phone. Mr. Kang, the voice continued, I'd recommend verifying this before noon. After noon, the document enters a different kind of process, and the nature of the conversation changes considerably. A brief pause. My employer wanted you both to know that this was never personal. It is simply business. And business, as you know, requires clarity about who holds what. The call ended. Taejin had his other phone to his ear already, his legal director's line, and Vanessa could hear it ringing through, and his voice, when it connected, was completely unrecognizable to her. Stripped of everything except command, every personal frequency gone, what remained was something she had never been in the room with before. The voice he used when the thing happening was the kind of thing that could not be allowed to happen. She sat in the chair. She was doing the inventory she'd told herself to wait for, and she was doing it now because there was no more waiting. She was looking at the full damage of what 24 hours had produced, and what she saw was this. Her mother-in-law had not simply tried to humiliate her. She had been running a coordinated campaign in partnership with a business adversary, using a legal architecture that had been quietly constructed around an 18-month-old authorization document designed to transfer control of Taejin's business interests into a merger framework that he had not agreed to and could not have anticipated. Yesterday's cruelty in the sitting room was the distraction. The document executed at 6:45 this morning was the actual strike. And the phone call was a warning, or a threat, dressed as a warning, from someone inside the park's operation who had just told them with great precision exactly how little time they had. Taejin ended his call. His face when he looked at her confirmed everything before he said a word. It's real, he said. How much damage, she said. If it's structured the way she's describing, it could give the park's legal standing to claim a seat at the table on the Incheon negotiations. It doesn't transfer ownership, but it creates a dispute that could freeze our operations for... He stopped. Months. Possibly longer. Long enough for Park Sungo to find another way in while we're tied up in it. Can you contest it? The authorization document is real. I signed it. I signed it for a different category of purpose, but they've structured the merger document to fall within its language. His jaw was so tight she could see the muscle working. My attorney says we have a case, but the immediate damage is already done, she said. Yes. She stood up. She was not going to sit still for this. That was the one thing she was certain of. That whatever happened next, she was not going to absorb it from a chair. She moved to the window again, the city again, Seoul in the full morning now, and she stood there and she felt the full weight of where they were, legally compromised, strategically exposed. The target of something that had been years in the making and 24 hours in execution. And the person she loved most had known pieces of it and not told her, and she had to decide right now whether that was the kind of thing you survive together or the kind of thing that ends you. She felt his presence behind her before he spoke. "Tell me what you need," he said. His voice was stripped to its bones. No management, no control, nothing performed, just the question. She looked at Sol. She thought about who she was before this city, who she had been before this house. The girl who'd recalibrated in a financial aid office. The woman who'd kept her hand steady in a room full of people who were laughing at her. She thought about what it had taken to become the person who could absorb yesterday with her dignity intact and wake up the next morning ready to understand the full dimensions of a war she hadn't known she was in. Then she turned around. "I need the file," she said. "Your mother's file on me, every page. I need your legal team on a call in the next 30 minutes. I need everything you know about Park Sung-go, the 3 years of conflict, every attempted acquisition, the media campaign, all of it." She looked at him directly. "And I need you to understand that from this moment, I am not the thing being protected. I am the person in this fight with you." She paused. "Can you work with that?" He looked at her. And for the first time since he'd walked out of the shadows of the hallway the night before, something in his face that had been locked down and controlled and exhausted broke open into something that was not relief exactly. It was more specific than relief. It was the expression of a man who has been carrying something alone for a very long time and has just been told he didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. She was already moving to the desk, pulling the closest chair around to face his side of it, rather than the opposite, sitting down next to him instead of across from him, and the simple geometry of that, the physical fact of her choosing to be beside him rather than facing him, seemed to do something to him that words hadn't. He sat down next to her. He opened the first folder. They went to work. The legal call connected at 7:22. Taejin's head attorney was a man named Baek Jun-ho, 63 years old, the kind of lawyer who had been in rooms where catastrophic things were decided and had developed over 4 decades, the specific metabolism of someone who processes crisis, the way other people process oxygen, not without feeling it, but without being incapacitated by it. His voice on the call was measured and immediate, which meant he had already been awake and already working on this before Taejin called, which meant someone had alerted him before they did. Vanessa noted this. She wrote it on the yellow legal pad she'd found in the desk drawer. She had been taking notes since they sat down, handwritten, specific, the way her first mentor in the nonprofit sector had taught her. Write it down because memory edits and paper doesn't. "The authorization document," Taejin said, "walk me through the category language." Baek Junho's voice came through the speaker. "The 2000 blanket authorization covered strategic partnership agreements under a specific revenue threshold and within 3 defined industry categories. The document your mother's attorney filed this morning was structured as a logistics infrastructure consultation framework, which falls technically within the 3rd category." "Technically," Taejin said. "The argument exists," Baek Junho said carefully. "It's not an airtight argument, but in an immediate legal challenge, the burden of demonstrating that the document falls outside the authorization rests with us. And that process takes time we don't currently have if the parks intend to move on the Incheon negotiations using this as standing." "How much time do we have before they can use it?" Vanessa said. A brief pause on the line, Baek Junho recalibrating for the presence of a second voice. "Mrs. Kang, given what's been filed this morning, and assuming the parks move quickly, which everything suggests they will, we're looking at a 48 to 72-hour window before this document can be invoked in a formal negotiation context." "And if they invoke it," she said, "what exactly can they demand?" "A seat at the Incheon table. The right to present a competing bid framework. Legally, they couldn't take the network from Taejin, but they could create enough procedural obstruction to freeze any other deals Taejin is trying to close. And in a market that moves the way this one does, a freeze of 3 to 4 months at the Incheon operation could cost—" He paused. She could hear him deciding whether to say the number. "Conservatively, between 80 and 120 billion won in delayed contracts." The room was very quiet. "Attorney Baek," Vanessa said. "The person who called us this morning said the document could become unavailable to us after noon. What did she mean by unavailable?" Another pause. "There is a window. It's narrow. within which an authorization document can be challenged on the grounds of material misrepresentation of purpose. That window closes once the document has been formally entered into a proceedings context. If the parks file it with a neutral arbitration body before noon today, we lose the window, Taejin said. We lose the window, Baek Junho confirmed. Vanessa looked at her notes, looked at the time on her phone, 7:31, approximately 4.5 hours. Can we file a challenge before they file? She said, a pause that lasted longer than the others. It would require demonstrating, immediately, with supporting documentation, that the authorization document was obtained through a process that misrepresented its intended use. In other words, we would need to show that Madam Kang's attorney knew that the authorization Taejin signed in 2022 was not intended to cover this type of document and filed it anyway. And if we have Madam Kang's file, Vanessa said, the one documenting her planning process, her correspondence with the park's representatives, the timeline of when the relationship with Park Sung-ho's office began relative to when Taejin signed the original authorization, she heard Baek Junho breathe differently. Mrs. Kang, he said slowly, if that documentation exists and can be obtained and verified within the next 3 hours. It exists, Taejin said. I have it. The silence on the line lasted exactly 4 seconds. Then I need it in my office in 90 minutes, Baek Junho said, and his voice had changed, the measured quality replaced by something operational and focused. And I need you to understand that what we're doing is filing a counter-challenge that will name Madam Kang directly as a party to a coordinated misrepresentation. This will become a matter of formal legal record. It will not be quiet. Taejin's hand was flat on the desk. I understand. And Park Sung-ho's involvement, if we name him as a co-conspirator in the misrepresentation, we are beginning a legal conflict with the second largest private logistics operator in the country. This will not resolve in 90 minutes. This will be a war. I understand, Taejin said. His voice hadn't changed, not by a frequency. Then I'll need the files, Baek Junho said. 90 minutes. The call ended. Taejin was already on his feet, moving to the safe behind the left panel of bookshelves, the one that looked like a wall until you knew what you were looking at. Vanessa was behind him with the legal pad. He pulled the file, the physical file, his mother's file, the one he'd found 3 weeks ago, and turned and looked at his wife, and something passed between them that wasn't words and wasn't anything so simple as understanding. It was the specific gravity of two people who have just agreed to walk into something that will change the shape of their lives, regardless of the outcome. Ready? He said. Get the car, she said. The drive to Baek Junho's office took 22 minutes. Vanessa sat in the back with the file open on her lap and read every page while Taejin made calls to his 2 most senior operations directors, briefing them in terms precise enough to convey urgency without triggering the kind of operational panic that spreads through a large organization like a virus. She listened to his side of those calls while she read. He was very good. She had always known this intellectually, had seen him work, had seen the respect that other powerful people brought into rooms where he was present. But she was watching something different now, the specific capability of a man who operates under pressure, not by rising above emotion, but by channeling it into an extraordinary compression of focus. She turned a page in the file and stopped. The page was a printed email. The date on it was 14 months ago. The sender was listed as an internal address from Madam Kang's personal assistant. The recipient was Park Sung-ho's private office. The body of the email was 4 sentences. The 4th sentence read, in translation, she worked through with the Korean she had. My employer believes the timeline can be accelerated if the marriage issue is resolved before the end of Q1 of the following year. She is prepared to take direct action. Vanessa read it twice. Take direct action, 14 months ago. They had been married for 8 months at that point. Taejin was planning. She remembered this. She remembered this specifically. A trip they'd taken to Jeju in December, their first real vacation since the wedding, the one where he'd woken up before her every morning and brought coffee to the balcony, and they'd sat in the early light and not talked about anything that mattered, and it had been one of the best weeks of her life. While his mother was writing emails about accelerating a timeline to resolve the marriage issue. She read the sentence a 3rd time. Then she very carefully turned the page. Taejin was finishing his 2nd call. He looked over at her. She turned the file so he could see the page. She watched his eyes find the sentence, watched his face do something she hadn't seen it do before. Not the controlled compression of the last 12 hours, not the tired honesty of the garden, not the stripped-down urgency of the legal call. Something older and more personal. The face of a son who has just seen written proof of something he'd been hoping, on some level, was less deliberate than it was. He turned away, looked out the window at Seoul moving past. She turned the page back and kept reading. She did not say anything. There was nothing to say. Some discoveries don't need commentary. They just need to be witnessed and then carried and then, eventually, integrated into the revised map of the world you now have to navigate. Baek Junho's office occupied the 27th floor of a building in Junggu that looked, from the outside, exactly as powerful as it was. The receptionist had them in a conference room before they'd finished removing their coats, which meant Baek Junho had cleared everything from his morning and told his staff to treat this arrival as the only thing that existed. He was already seated when they walked in. 3 members of his team flanked him, each with a laptop open and a notepad ready. He stood when Vanessa entered and shook her hand before Taejin's, which she noted as the courtesy of a man who had understood, from the phone call, who had driven this morning forward. Taejin placed the file on the table. Baek Junho opened it, scanned the first page, turned to the second. His face remained professionally neutral, but his right hand moved to signal one of his associates, who started typing immediately, and Vanessa understood that he had found, in the first 2 pages, enough to confirm what he'd been hoping to find. The email on page 7, Vanessa said, 14 months ago. The phrase, take direct action, does that constitute intent? Baek Junho said, not looking up. Yes, combined with the correspondence timeline, and the authorization document date. He turned 2 more pages. This is a pattern. This is a documentable pattern of coordinated action. He finally looked up. Where did this file originate? My mother's office, Taejin said. I accessed it 3 weeks ago during an internal audit of family business records. Everything in that folder was generated by or received by her personal office. And she doesn't know you have it? No. Baek Junho looked at him steadily. She will, after we file. I know. A pause. Baek Junho looked at Vanessa. Something in his assessment of her shifted slightly. She saw it, the small recalibration, the revised picture. Mrs. Kang, the anonymous call this morning, the number, do you still have it? She placed her phone on the table. Baek Junho's tech associate took it with a brief nod, connected it to something, returned it in 40 seconds. We'll have a trace on that within the hour, Baek Junho said. If it leads back to the park's office, it establishes their active role in the destabilization effort, which strengthens the misrepresentation claim considerably. They called us, she said. They wanted us to know about the document. Why would Park Sung-go's people tell us about a move they were making against us? Baek Junho looked at her, then at Taejin. Because, Taejin said slowly, they didn't want the move. Someone inside the park's operation called us against Park Sung-go's instructions. The room went quiet for a moment. A faction, Baek Junho said carefully. Or a conscience, Vanessa said. In this world, Baek Junho said, not unkindly, those are sometimes the same thing. He straightened the file in front of him. I'm going to need 2 hours. We'll have the challenge filed before 11. But I need you both available by phone, and I need... He looked at Taejin. I need authorization to name your mother as a direct party. The room held its breath. Taejin's hands were on the table. Both of them, flat, the marble in the kitchen gesture, the ground-finding gesture. Vanessa did not look at him. She looked at her own hands. She would not make this easier for him by watching him do it. This was his to carry. You have authorization, he said. They were back in this car by 9:40. Taejin made 2 more calls from the back seat. She sat beside him and looked out the window and ran the morning's information through the architecture of everything she'd known before it, and tried to build something coherent, a map she could actually use. At 9:57, his phone rang. His expression when he saw the name on the screen told her everything before he said it. It's my mother, he said. She looked at him. She knows, he said. Take it, Vanessa said. He answered. Put it on speaker, partially. Not full volume, but enough that Vanessa could hear the texture of Madame Kang's voice without every word. What she heard was not the measured architectural cruelty of the sitting room. What she heard was a woman whose composure had fractured, her Korean coming fast and fractured at its edges, and even without catching every word, Vanessa could hear the shape of it. Accusation, then something pleading, then something that sounded like it was trying to revert to authority and couldn't quite get there. Taejin listened. He let her speak for 90 seconds, which she understood was not passivity, but deliberateness. He was giving her the rope and the time and the space to say everything she intended to say, so that later there could be no claim that she hadn't been heard. Then he said, in Korean, quiet and complete, something that lasted less than 30 seconds. Then he ended the call. "What did you say?" Vanessa asked. "I told her that Baek Junho's office would be in contact with her attorney today, and that I loved her, and that those two things were not in contradiction." He put his phone in his jacket pocket. His hand, when it reappeared, was not entirely steady. She has until this evening to cooperate voluntarily with the challenge process. If she doesn't, the file goes forward as adversarial. Vanessa looked at him. The not entirely steady hand. The cost of that 30-second sentence, accumulated through 61 years of a relationship being renegotiated in real time. She put her hand over his. He turned his palm upward and held on. Park Sung-ho called at 10:19, not Taejin's phone, Vanessa's. She saw the number, different from the morning's anonymous call, but carrying an area code she'd learned that morning to associate with the park's main office building. And she felt the specific cold focus that had been building in her since she'd read that email in the car, the one about accelerating the timeline, and she answered it. "Mrs. Kang," said a voice that was male, mid-60s, with the controlled timbre of a man who had conducted 1,000 high-stakes conversations and measured every word before it left his mouth. "I appreciate you taking my call directly." "Mr. Park," she said. She kept her voice completely level. She did not look at Taejin, though she felt him go still beside her. "I was expecting you might reach out." A brief pause, almost imperceptible, the pause of a man recalibrating slightly for a counterpart who is not behaving as predicted. "I wanted to speak with you before this progresses further in a direction that is disadvantageous to everyone." "Disadvantageous," she said. "Legal proceedings of the type your attorney is currently preparing are expensive and slow and tend to damage multiple parties in ways that the original disagreement rarely justifies." His voice was smooth, practiced, the voice of someone who resolved conflicts by reframing them as mutual inconveniences. "I believe there is still an arrangement possible that serves the business interests of both families without the part where it becomes public record that you and my mother-in-law coordinated a plan to end my marriage," she said. The pause this time was longer. "I understand your perspective," he said. "I don't think you do," she said. "But let me tell you mine directly, since we're talking." She looked at the Seoul streets moving outside the window. "What you and Madame Kang built over the past 14 months was not a business strategy. It was a campaign. You used a legal document my husband signed in good faith. You cultivated a relationship with his mother to access his family's vulnerabilities. And you executed a coordinated action yesterday designed to humiliate his wife and destabilize his marriage while a separate legal mechanism was triggered this morning." She paused. "That is not a business dispute. That is something else entirely." A long silence. "Mrs. Kang," he said, and his voice had changed. Not softer, but more careful. The way a man sounds when he's realized he's underestimated who he's talking to. "You are clearly a remarkable woman." "Yes," she said, "I am. And I'm also the person who just handed your entire timeline and correspondence record to Baek Junho's office. So," she let that land, "if you have a genuine proposal for resolving this without it becoming the kind of legal and public catastrophe that neither of our families needs, I suggest you make it to Attorney Baek before 11 o'clock. She paused. "Otherwise, we'll let the process decide." She ended the call. The car was completely silent for a moment. Then Taejin said very quietly, "You just negotiated with Park Sung-ho." "Someone had to," she said. "He called your phone." "I know. He called your phone because he thought—" He stopped. "He thought you'd be easier." "I know," she said again. He looked at her. "Nessa." "Don't," she said, not harshly. Don't do the thing where you tell me I was incredible or brave or whatever. I just had a conversation. Let's see if it worked. He was quiet for a moment, then very carefully, like a man handling something that matters. When did you get this? Get what? This. He moved his hand slightly, indicating her, the call, the morning, all of it. This kind of, I've always had it, she said. You just weren't watching for it. She looked at him. That's the thing about keeping someone on the outside of a fight. You miss what they're capable of. He held her gaze. I know, he said. And the way he said it, not as apology, not as concession, just as a simple accounting of a true thing, landed in her chest and settled there. Baek Junho called at 10:58, 2 minutes to spare. Park Sung-go's attorney contacted us 12 minutes ago, he said. His voice had a quality Vanessa hadn't heard in it before. Not quite satisfaction, something more professional than that, the tone of a craftsman who has just seen a complex piece resolved correctly. They're proposing a withdrawal of the authorization document in exchange for a negotiated confidentiality agreement covering the contents of the Kang family file. Meaning they want the emails buried, Taejin said. Meaning they want the correspondence history to not become part of a public record, Baek Junho said carefully. There's a version of this where you agree to that and they withdraw, and the Incheon network remains entirely yours. No legal proceedings, clean resolution. And my mother, Taejin said. A pause. She would need to formally withdraw the authorization and sign a statement confirming it was executed outside the scope of your original consent, which effectively ends her legal authority over any Kang family business instrument. The car moved through Seoul. The city was fully alive now, indifferent and continuous. 1 million people navigating their own emergencies and their own ordinary days, and inside this car 2 people were sitting with the weight of what had been built and broken and what came next. And if we don't agree, Vanessa said, if we let it go to formal proceedings, then everything becomes public record, Baek Junho said. The park's involvement, your mother's correspondence, the marital alliance proposal, all of it. The parks lose significantly in public credibility. Your family takes some damage too. The Incheon network is protected legally, but the proceedings take 12 to 18 months and cost. I know what they cost, Taejin said. Another pause. There is a third option, Baek Junho said. One I want you to consider carefully before the 11 o'clock window closes. Tell me, Taejin said. Agree to the confidentiality on the correspondence, protect your mother's involvement from becoming public, but do not accept a clean withdrawal. Instead, negotiate a formal acknowledgement of the document's invalidity and require the parks to make a public statement of no further claim on the Incheon network. No details of why, just the statement. Baek Junho's voice was steady. It protects your mother from public exposure. It terminates the park's play permanently. And it does so without the 18 months. A pause. The cost is that you cannot pursue damages. You simply end it. Taejin looked at Vanessa. She looked back at him. She thought about his mother's voice on the phone, fractured and fast. She thought about the email, take direct action, and the Jeju balcony and the coffee at dawn. She thought about Min Jae in the sunroom, saying he wanted to know how far we'd go, and about the orchids still in the foyer at home, some stems taller than others, the way real things grow. She thought about the kind of person she wanted to be at the end of this, regardless of what she had every right to want. What do you think? Taejin asked her. Directly. No qualifier. She thought about it for 3 seconds. Protect her, she said, from the public part, not from the consequences. Not from losing the authority, not from the formal acknowledgement, but from having her name in headlines. She met his eyes. She's your mother. She did something unforgivable. Both those things are true. Something in his face broke open and closed again in the space of a single second. Baek Junho, he said, pursue the third option. Understood, Baek Junho said. I'll need your formal authorization. You have it. Then we have work to do before 11. A pause. Mrs. Kang, thank you for the call with Park Sung-go. Whatever you said to him in those 19 minutes moved this considerably faster than it would have moved otherwise. Vanessa looked out the window. He underestimated me, she said. People tend to. Yes, Baek Junho said. I noticed. And in his voice, under the professional precision, something that might have been the beginning of a different kind of respect. I'll be in touch within the hour. The call ended. They were on the road back to the estate, the morning behind them and the afternoon ahead, and the city flowing past like water around a stone, and the stone still there, still solid, worn and changed but present. Taejin's hand was still in hers. At 10:59, with 1 minute to the deadline, Baek Junho filed the counter-challenge. At 11:14, Park Sung-ho's attorneys called back. At 11:41, Taejin's phone buzzed with a 3-word message from a number he recognized as his mother's personal line, not her business line, the one she used for things that were not official and not managed and not filtered through the architecture of who she was supposed to be. He read it. His face did the private thing, the one that wasn't for anyone watching. He handed the phone to Vanessa. 3 words, in Korean. She read them, looked up at him. "What does it mean?" she said. She knew the words individually, but the combination had a register she didn't fully trust herself to read. "It means," he said slowly, "I see you." He paused. "She's never said that to me before. Not once in my entire life." Vanessa held the phone for a moment. Then she placed it back in his hand. Outside the window, Seoul went about its business. Inside the car, something that had been broken for longer than either of them had known was being held, carefully, in both hands. Not yet repaired, not close to repaired, but held, which was the first necessary thing. And then his second phone rang. The operations line. The one that did not ring unless something was moving that could not wait. He answered. His face changed. "When?" he said. A pause. His jaw set. "How many people know?" he said. Another pause, longer. "Don't let it move until I get there," he said, and ended the call. He looked at Vanessa, and in his face she saw something that made her stomach drop. Not fear, Taejin did not traffic in fear, but the specific expression of a man who has just been told that the crisis he thought was ending has what happened, Vanessa said. He was already leaning forward to tell the driver to turn around, his hand up, 2 fingers extended, the gesture that meant change direction, now, no explanation needed. And the car was pivoting before he answered her. "Someone leaked the file," he said. She went still. "Which file?" "My mother's." His voice was flat in the way that things are flat when they have been pressed down to their most essential surface. "The correspondence, the emails, the marital alliance proposal, all of it." He looked at her. "It went to 3 separate media outlets 40 minutes ago. It's already moving." She absorbed this. "Baek Junho didn't do it. I know his operation. This didn't come from his office." His jaw worked. "Someone else had a copy." "The Parks," she said. "Or someone inside the Parks office acting independently." His eyes were on the road ahead, already calculating, already 3 moves into a situation that had just rearranged itself entirely. "The person who called you this morning, whoever inside their operation tipped us off, they may have also sent the file to the press. As insurance. As a way to prevent Park Sung-ho from burying it in a confidentiality agreement." Vanessa thought about the voice on the phone. Female. Precise. Rehearsed but not cold. There had been something underneath the rehearsed quality, something that had the texture of conviction rather than pure strategy. "She didn't want it buried," Vanessa said slowly. "No. She wanted it out." Vanessa looked at him. "Whoever she is inside that organization, she didn't call us to help us. She called us to make sure we knew enough to react before the press got it. She wanted both things to happen simultaneously. The legal challenge and the public exposure. Because confidentiality protects the Parks too," he said. "A quiet withdrawal lets Park Sung-ho walk away clean. The press leak removes that option." The car moved through Seoul. 11:53 in the morning. The city was at full operational pitch, indifferent as always, and somewhere in its media infrastructure 3 stories were being assembled from a document package that named Madam Kang, named Park Sung-ho, named a marital alliance proposal, named Vanessa Carter Kang as the subject of a coordinated removal campaign, and the names would be in headlines before the afternoon. "I told Baek Junho to protect her," Taejin said. His voice was very quiet. "From the public part. I know. That's no longer possible." She looked at his profile, the set of his jaw, the specific stillness around his eyes that she had learned to read as the topography of a man processing something that costs more than money. "No," she said. It's not. He didn't say anything for a moment. She did this to herself, Vanessa said carefully. Not without compassion, but clearly. Everything in that file, every email, every meeting, every conversation with the Parks, she chose. Whatever is in those stories today, she wrote it herself, long before anyone leaked it. I know, he said. Then don't carry it like it's yours. He looked at her. His eyes were very tired and very clear. She's my mother. I know, no, Vanessa said. Both things are true. She did this and she's your mother. You can grieve one without excusing the other. She held his gaze. You've known how to do that for a while. You just haven't had to do it about her specifically. The car turned onto a wider road. Ahead, the skyline opened up, Seoul in full daylight, the kind of city that moves like water around everything. Crisis and ordinary Tuesday, devastation and lunch. Just keeps moving, just keeps being the city, entirely unimpressed by the things that feel enormous when you're inside them. His phone was ringing again. He silenced it. Where are we going? She asked. He looked at her for a moment, then he said very quietly to the driver, the estate. They were home by 12:30. The orchids were still in the foyer. Some of them had started to open further, the petals wider than this morning. The white of them, the particular white of something that was going to be briefly, entirely beautiful before it was done. Vanessa stopped in the foyer and looked at them. Tajin stopped beside her. Neither of them said anything for a moment. Then she picked one stem from the arrangement. Not the tallest, not the most perfectly open, one of the middle ones, a bud that was half unfurled and still becoming what it was going to be, and held it and carried it with her into the kitchen and put it in a small glass of water on the window ledge above the sink where the morning light had shifted to afternoon light, pale and thin and still present. She wasn't entirely sure why she did this. Later she would understand it as the gesture of a woman who needed to establish, in some small and private way, that something from this day was going to continue past it, that not everything the day had touched was over. Taejin followed her in. He stood at the island. He looked at the small glass with the one orchid stem, and something in his face settled, slightly, some tension that had been structural since 6 in the morning releasing a fraction. He said, "The press calls are going to start within the hour." "I know. Baek Junho will handle the legal positioning, but the public narrative," he stopped, "is something we can't control," she said. "So we don't try." He looked at her. "We don't make statements," she said. "We don't respond to the stories. We don't give any interview or comment that participates in the news cycle's version of this." She looked at him steadily. "Because the moment we respond, we become characters in their story. Right now, we are still the authors of our own." He was quiet for a moment. "My mother will be named in every story. Yes. There will be... The language they use will be harsh," she said. "Yes, it will be harsh. She's 61 years old." Vanessa looked at him. She was holding this very carefully. The space between accountability and cruelty, the difference between allowing consequences and adding to them. It was a narrow space and she was aware of standing exactly in it. "She's 61 years old," she agreed, "and she spent 14 months building a legal and social campaign to end our marriage, including drafting a file about me that was designed to be used in dissolution proceedings." She paused. "I don't want her destroyed. I want you to believe that because it's true. But I also cannot stand here and tell you she doesn't deserve the consequences of what she built. Those two things have to be able to exist at the same time." He put both hands on the island, pressed them flat, breathed. "Yes," he said, "they do." Minji called it 1:15. Taejin was in the study dealing with the operational consequences of the morning. The Incheon team needed reassurance. 2 partner organizations had already been in contact wanting clarification. Baek Junho's office was managing the formal termination of the park's legal claim and needed Taejin available by phone. The house was full of the particular low-frequency hum of crisis being managed from a fixed position, which was different from the mobile crisis of the morning. This had the quality of aftermath, which is its own kind of weight. Vanessa answered Minji's call because Taejin couldn't, and because she decided she was the right person for it anyway. "It's on KBC," Minji said, without preamble. Her voice was stripped of everything. The boardroom control, the calculated evenness, the the specific register she used to signal that she was always the most composed person in any room. What was left was just a woman, 37 years old, watching her family's private machinery become public. They have the emails, they have the file. They're running a segment at 2. I know, Vanessa said. A pause. Is Taejin? He's managing the business side. He's okay. Another pause, longer. Vanessa. The use of her name, first name, no formality, none of the distance that had been the default setting of every exchange they'd had, landed with a weight that was almost physical. I need to tell you something. Okay. I knew about the parks, Minjae said, not the full extent, not the document, not the authorization mechanism, but I knew our mother was in contact with them. I knew she had been exploring options. A breath. I told myself it was her business, that it wasn't my place to... She stopped. That's not true. I told myself it wasn't my problem, because if it worked, it solved something I had also decided was a problem. Vanessa stood in the kitchen with her hand flat on the counter and listened. I didn't make the calls, Minjae said. I didn't sit in those meetings, but I knew enough, and I didn't say anything, and yesterday, her voice developed a fault line, something cracking underneath it. Not grief exactly, but its structural precursor. Yesterday, I sat in that room and I participated in something that I can dress up in whatever language I want, but at the end of it, I participated in the deliberate humiliation of a woman who had not done anything to deserve it, except marry my brother. A pause. And I've been sitting in my apartment since last night trying to locate the version of myself that I can live with going forward, and I keep coming back to the same place. Which is, Vanessa said, that I owe you an apology that isn't about strategy, Minjae said. Not because of what's in the news today or what it means for the family's public position or what Taejin will or won't forgive. Just a breath. I sat in that room and I watched them take pieces out of you, and I didn't stop it. And I should have. Whatever I believe about what's right for this family, whatever I think about... She paused. None of that gives me the right to do what was done yesterday. To you specifically. In the way that it was done. This kitchen was very quiet. The orchid stem on the window ledge caught a movement of light. I hear you, Vanessa said. I'm not asking for... I know you're not. Vanessa looked at the orchid. I hear you, Minjae. That's all I have right now. I'm not in a position to tell you we're fine, or that it's resolved, or that one conversation covers what happened. But I hear you. A very long pause. That's fair, Minjae said. Her voice was quiet and had something in it that sounded like the beginning of understanding what fair actually costs. Can you tell Taejin that I'll be available? Whatever he needs from me today. I'll handle whatever needs to be handled publicly about the family response. I can do that much. I'll tell him. Vanessa. Her name again. I was wrong about you. I want you to know I understand that now. A pause. I'm not sure what that understanding is worth to you at this point. Not much right now, Vanessa said honestly, but ask me again in 6 months. She heard something that might have been Minjae almost laughing or almost crying. The two sounds are close enough that at a certain level of raw, they become indistinguishable. Okay, Minjae said. 6 months. The 2 o'clock segment ran. Taejin watched it from his study. Vanessa watched it from the small television in the kitchen because she needed to know what the world was being told about her life, and she wanted to receive that information alone, without having to manage how she received it in front of anyone else. The segment was detailed. The correspondent had clearly had the file for long enough to have read it carefully. They named Madam Kang. They named Park Sung-ho. They outlined the marital alliance proposal in terms that were accurate and in a tone that was the studied neutrality of journalism that knows it doesn't need to editorialize because the material speaks for itself. They used a photograph of Vanessa from a public event, one from 14 months ago, the Hanam dinner, her in a dark green dress standing beside Taejin in front of a room of Seoul's most powerful people, both of them mid-conversation, both of them completely unaware that this moment was being recorded for reasons that would only become relevant now. She looked at herself in the photograph. She looked at the woman in the dark green dress who had walked into that room and managed those conversations and driven home afterward feeling like she was slowly and imperfectly finding the shape of her place here. She looked at her for a long moment. Then she turned the television off. Madam Kang arrived at the estate at 3:45. She did not call ahead. She came in her own car, without her personal assistant, without any of the apparatus of the woman who had arrived yesterday morning with an audience in a prepared position. She was wearing something dark and simple, and her silver hair was perfect. It would always be perfect. That was simply who she was. But everything else had changed. The posture was still there, the 61 years of it, but it was holding something different now. Not authority. Something more difficult than authority. Vanessa saw the car from the upstairs window. She went to the study and knocked twice and opened the door. Taejin was on the phone. She held up one finger. One moment, important. And when he saw her face, he wrapped the call in 40 seconds and looked at her. "Your mother," she said. He stood. "Alone," Vanessa said. "Give me 10 minutes with her first." He looked at her. She watched him make the calculation. Not whether to trust her, but whether this was something he could allow himself to not be present for. And she watched him decide. 10 minutes, he said. She went downstairs. Madame Kong was in this foyer. She had let herself in, which she always did, and she was standing among the orchids with her coat still on. And she was looking at the flowers the way you look at something when you are trying to find a fixed point, and everything familiar has stopped being reliable. She heard Vanessa on the stairs and turned. They looked at each other. Yesterday there had been a sitting room full of witnesses and tea and the performance of a considered cruelty. Today there was just the foyer and the orchids and two women who had been, for 14 months, on opposite sides of a campaign that one of them hadn't known was happening. Madame Kang spoke first. "I watched the segment," she said. Her English was careful and deliberate, the way it had been yesterday, which meant she was choosing to speak in Vanessa's primary language, which was itself a choice. "I saw what they showed." "Yes," Vanessa said. "The emails." A pause. Hearing them read aloud. Her jaw moved slightly. That was a different experience from having written them. Vanessa said nothing. She was giving the space. "I want to explain something to you," Madame Kang said. "I am not asking you to forgive me. I understand that is not a reasonable thing to ask. Perhaps ever. Certainly not today." She looked at Vanessa directly. "But I want to explain something because I think I owe you at least the truth of why, even if the why doesn't justify the what." "Okay," Vanessa said. Madame Kang's eyes were dry. She was not going to cry. This was not a woman who cried in front of witnesses. It was simply not the architecture of who she was. But there was something in her face that was as close to stripped as Vanessa had ever seen it. "My husband died when Taejin was 19, she said. "You know this." "Yes." "What you don't know, what no one speaks about in this family, is that the 6 months before he died were the worst of our marriage. He had made decisions, business decisions, personal decisions. He had—" She stopped, gathered something. "He had compromised the family in ways that I spent the following decade repairing. Quietly. Without anyone knowing how close we came to losing everything." Her voice was controlled and underneath the control. Something was moving, old and dense. "Taejin doesn't know the full extent of it. I protected him from it because he was 19 and grieving, and he needed to be able to become who he needed to become without carrying his father's worst decisions alongside his grief." Vanessa listened. "My husband loved me the way Taejin loves you," Madame Kang said, "with everything, without measuring the cost." A pause. "And that love was real. It was the realest thing in my life. And it also, the man who loved me that way, also nearly destroyed everything I had spent my adult life building, because the intensity of how he felt was not matched by the wisdom of his judgment, and I loved him too much to stop him when I should have." Her voice remained level. "I watched my son become a man. I watched him build what his father could not sustain, and when I saw him fall the same way, completely, without calculation, for someone who—" She stopped. Her jaw was tight. "I saw the pattern, and I was terrified." The foyer was very quiet. "You thought I was the risk," Vanessa said. "I thought the feeling was the risk," Madame Kang said. "I thought, if I could redirect it, if I could find him something stable, someone who fit the structures that needed to hold, someone who would not require him to—" She paused. "I told myself it was protection. I told myself it was what a mother does." "And now," Vanessa said, a long silence. "Now I have watched my son stand in a legal office and name me in a formal document, Madame Kang said. And I have watched a television segment read my private correspondence to the city I have lived in for 61 years. And I have sat in my apartment since this morning, understanding that everything I did to protect my son has resulted in the greatest damage to him that anyone has caused in his adult life. Her chin was level. Her eyes were direct. And that person is me. Vanessa held her gaze. She was doing the honest inventory. She was looking at this woman, this complicated, formidable, genuinely frightened woman who had done something genuinely terrible from a place that was, underneath the terrible, recognizably human. And she was trying to locate the truth of what she felt. She didn't feel warmth. She wasn't going to pretend warmth. She felt something more complicated, something that had no clean name, something that acknowledged the human dimensions of the woman in front of her without using them to erase what had been done. I am not the risk, Vanessa said. I need you to understand that, not as a concession and not as a negotiation, as a fact that I am telling you directly so that you have heard it from me, clearly, once, and cannot claim otherwise. She kept her voice even. I love your son. I am not going to manage his decline or compromise his future or cost him things he cannot afford to lose. I am the person who sat in this house yesterday and did not break, and who got up this morning and went to work on the hardest day of our marriage, and who told your son to protect you from the public part of this even after reading every email you wrote. She paused. That is who I am. You built a file to argue otherwise. The file was wrong. Madame Kang was very still. Yes, she said. Her voice was very quiet. It was. Footsteps on the stairs behind Vanessa. She didn't turn around. She knew the footsteps. Taejin came to stand beside her. He looked at his mother. For a long time, none of them spoke. Then Taejin said, in Korean, something brief and very quiet. Vanessa caught 3 words, enough to know it was not an accusation and not a forgiveness, but something in between, something that had the shape of a door left partially open rather than slammed. Madame Kang's composure, which had held through the segment and the drive and the conversation and everything that had built to this moment, developed a single fracture, just visible, just present, 1 second of something beneath the 61 years of architecture, a woman and her son in a foyer full of orchids with the wreckage of a terrible decision between them and nothing easy ahead. She reached out and put her hand briefly on Taejin's arm. Then she turned and walked out of the house. The car in the courtyard started. The gravel. Then silence. Taejin stood very still. Then he exhaled, a long, slow release, the kind that comes from somewhere deeper than the lungs, the kind that has been waiting all day for permission to happen. Vanessa put her hand on his back. Just her hand. Just there. He didn't say anything, neither did she. The legal resolution finalized at 6:17 that evening. Park Sung-ho, faced with public correspondence that detailed his coordination with Madame Kang and the media coverage that had made confidentiality irrelevant, withdrew every document and issued the formal statement Baek Joon-ho had demanded: no claim, no further legal or business action, the Incheon network uncontested and entirely under Kang Taejin's authority. The statement was brief and carefully worded and said nothing about why, which meant it said everything. Madame Kang's attorney filed the withdrawal of the authorization document the same afternoon and submitted the formal acknowledgement of its invalidity alongside Madame Kang's signed statement, confirming that the 2022 authorization had been used outside its intended scope. Her legal authority over all Kang family business instruments was formally terminated. She issued no public statement. Taejin issued one. 4 sentences, drafted by Baek Joon-ho and approved by Taejin, and reviewed by Vanessa, who changed 1 word, replaced dispute with matter, because dispute implied ongoing contention and the point was that it was over. The statement confirmed the resolution, expressed no further interest in public commentary, and thanked no one. It was, Baek Joon-ho said, the cleanest ending to something this complex that he had seen in 30 years of practice. He said this to Taejin, but he was looking at Vanessa when he said it. The house was quiet by 8. The operational calls had stopped. The legal calls had stopped. The world was digesting its news cycle and moving on to the next thing, which was what the world did, which was actually one of its more reliable qualities. Taejin found Vanessa in the room at the back of the 2nd floor that she had turned, in the first year of their marriage, into the thing she'd never had before. Not an office exactly, more an existence space, a room that was entirely hers in terms of what it held. Books she'd brought from Atlanta, a photograph of her grandmother, a drawing her youngest niece had made and mailed her, crayon on printer paper, a self-portrait with enormous hands. The chair by the window where she sat when she needed to be inside herself rather than inside anything else. She was in the chair. She had a book open on her lap that she was not reading. He came in and sat on the ottoman across from her and looked at her. "How are you?" he said. She thought about it honestly. "I don't know yet," she said. "I think I won't know for a while." "That's fair." "Your mother," she said. "Have you spoken to her since—" "I'll call her tomorrow," he said. "Not tonight. Tonight I don't have anything left for that conversation that would be worth saying." She nodded slowly. "Minji said she'll handle the family response publicly," Vanessa said. "Whatever that looks like." "I know. She texted me." A pause. "She texted me 7 times, actually, each one slightly more coherent than the last." Something that was almost humor moved briefly through his face. "She's not great with this kind of thing." "She's better than she knows," Vanessa said. He looked at her. "She called me," Vanessa said. "Early afternoon. She said what needed to be said." She paused. "Not enough to fix anything, but it was real." He absorbed this. "I didn't know she called." "I know. I handled it." He looked at her for a long moment. The lamp on the desk behind her made the room warm and dim, and the city outside the window had the nighttime quality of soul. Never fully dark, always that ambient glow of a place that doesn't completely stop. Inside this room, inside this specific quality of quiet after the longest day, something was present that hadn't been present for the past 24 hours. The absence of emergency. It felt unfamiliar, like a sound that has been constant stops and the silence is louder than the sound was. "I owe you an accounting," he said. "Tajin." "No." He leaned forward, forearms on his knees. "I want to say it. Everything I kept from you. The parks, the document, my mother's file. I made those calls for the reasons I told you, and the reasons I told you were real, but they were also—" He stopped. "I was afraid of what it meant for us if you knew how much was working against us. I was afraid that the size of the opposition would change your calculation." He looked at her directly. "That's not protection. That's control. And I know the difference, and I should have known better." She looked at him. The man across the ottoman from her, the man she had chosen, who was not uncomplicated and had never claimed to be, who had stood in a hallway and listened to find out the truth of what he was dealing with, and who had followed her out into a frozen garden without a jacket because he couldn't wait. "Yes," she said. "You should have." "I know. And if something like this happens again, it won't." "Tajin." He met her eyes. "It won't," he said. "Not because there won't be things to navigate. There will always be things to navigate. But because I understand now what it costs you when I manage you out of your own life. And I am not willing to pay that cost again. Not to you." A pause. "Not to us." She held his gaze for a long time. She thought about the morning message on her phone, the first tremor that had opened today's fault lines. She thought about the document with the phrase "take direct action" and the Jeju balcony and what it means to discover that the life you were living had a war underneath it the whole time. She thought about the sitting room, the room that felt like the beginning of this story but was actually somewhere deep in the middle of it, and the orchids and the legal call and Park Sung-go's voice recalibrating on the other end of the phone and Madame Kang's hand on Taejin's arm before she walked out. She thought about what the day had cost. The answer was everything. Everything it could cost short of the thing it had been trying to take. And that thing was still here, still in this room, still present on both sides of this conversation. "Okay," she said. He looked at her. "Okay." "We move forward," she said. "Carefully, with everything on the table from now on." She paused. "And you owe me an actual birthday." Something in him released. The last held thing of the day. The structural tension of a man who has been waiting to find out if what he feared losing was still there. He laughed, quietly, and it was the most human sound she had heard from him in 24 hours, and she felt it land in her chest and stay. "Name it," he said. "Not yet," she said. "Give me a few weeks. I'll tell you when I know what I want it to look like. Take whatever time you need." "I will." She looked at him. "I intend to." 3 weeks later, on a Thursday evening, Taijin organized a dinner. Not a large event, not a statement. A table for 12 in a private room of a restaurant in Itaewon that Vanessa had once mentioned in passing. She wanted to try, months ago, the offhand comment that he had stored and retrieved the way he retained everything that mattered to him. 12 people, all of them chosen by both of them, together, over 2 evenings of deliberate conversation about who had earned the right to be in the room. Her closest friend in Seoul, a Nigerian architect named Adaeze, who had befriended Vanessa at a design exhibition in their first year and never once made her feel like a category. A couple from the art world they both trusted. 2 members of Taejin's inner business circle who had demonstrated in the weeks since the story broke the specific quality of loyalty that doesn't recalibrate based on what's in the press. Her sister, flown in from Atlanta, who arrived at Incheon Airport with too much luggage and the voice note still saved on her phone that she'd been replaying for 3 weeks. And a few others, people who had shown, in small and concrete ways, that they understood the difference between proximity to power and genuine regard for the people who held it. Min Jae was not there. That was not forever. Vanessa had meant what she said. Ask me in 6 months. 6 months was not yet. 6 months required work that had barely begun. But it was a door not locked, and Min Jae knew it, and that knowledge was its own kind of ongoing conversation. Madame Kang was not there. That, too, was not forever. But forever and not yet occupy the same grammatical space, and this was still not yet. The dinner was simple. The food was extraordinary in the way food is extraordinary when someone has paid attention to what you actually like rather than what is impressive. The conversation was easy and real and moved the way conversation moves when no one at the table is performing anything. Vanessa's sister made everyone laugh 3 times in the first hour. Araez got into a passionate argument with one of the business colleagues about urban infrastructure that turned into a genuine exchange of ideas rather than a debate won or lost. Taejin sat beside Vanessa the whole evening. At one point, well into the dinner, when the conversation had spread around the table and the room had the warmth of people who are genuinely comfortable with each other, he leaned close and said very quietly, just for her, "Is this close?" She looked at the table, at the faces, at her sister laughing at something Adaez had said, at the warmth of the room and the absence of performance, and the presence of people who had been vetted by something more reliable than bloodline or social standing. "It's close," she said. He nodded, reached under the table and found her hand. She held on. Outside, Seoul moved in its perpetual way, enormous and indifferent and continuous, a city that had been here for centuries and would be here long after every crisis that felt seismic from the inside had been absorbed into its long, ongoing story. Inside this room, at this table, the woman they had tried to break was eating dinner with people who respected her. The man who had chosen her had paid every cost that choice required without looking for an exit. And the thing they had tried to take, the ordinary, extraordinary thing, the thing that has no impressive name, that goes by the inadequate word marriage or the even more inadequate word love, was still here. Still imperfect, still present, still theirs. The violin wasn't playing. There were no candles chosen by a man in a hotel room 43 days ago, trying to build the perfect version of a birthday she deserved. There was just a table and 12 people, and her sister's laugh and Taejin's hand and the city outside doing what cities do, which was, she had decided, exactly enough.